I'm Jared.
I'm Marcus.
Level with us. Hello and welcome to Level with Us, the show where we have a cozy video game discussion every week. And this week, we have partaken of the forbidden fruit.
We have tread where no Nintendo fan dare tread.
That is right.
The unknown wastelands. I'm sorry, not wastelands. Happy lands. The wonderful lands of PlayStation.
That is right. So Marcus and I, over the last couple weeks and months, we have played a few PlayStation exclusives and games on PlayStation consoles. And we've never really done this before. Occasionally, I've picked up a PS2 game at a friend's house growing up, but it's kind of just a new frontier that we've decided to delve into because we are Nintendo purists. Like, we really are. We've only grown up on the Nintendo platforms. I mean, am I wrong?
Oh yeah, I think you're right. I think we're dyed in the wool Nintendo fans all the way down to our roots.
True
and
blue.
It's probably something to do with what video game systems our parents would be willing to buy for us, if I had a theory. But once we were planted in that Nintendo soil, we just stuck right there.
And we will get into how that might affect our perception of these games. But before we do, I want to give a very grateful shout out to Dan, my friend who lent his PS4 and PS5 to me over the course of a few weeks to play through some of these games, which was very generous. Super, super grateful for that. And he will be receiving a PlayStation-themed gift from me as thanks. And also, Dan is kind of a wizard when it comes to keeping track of what games are coming out, where to pre-order things, where the best place is to pre-order things. And so I'm going to be including a link in our description to a website or podcast that he'll be starting in the future at some point. So
you're going to, after it exists, go back and put that in this description?
Yes.
Gotcha.
So right now it'll be blank. At the time of posting this, there will probably be nothing there. But if Dan's listening to this,
get your stuff together. Oh, sorry. Go on.
I'm just saying this is a future plug. So eventually he can make something and I'll plug it in. So,
just an aside, you said you were going to give something back to him. I wish you would have stopped that sentence. Because he let me borrow his PlayStation, I will be giving him a PlayStation. And I was hoping you'd just stop right there, because that would be funny.
Uh-huh.
That joke fell flat. Hey, actually, that reminds me. Are you editing this episode?
Yeah, so another disclaimer, this is going to be a pretty lengthy episode. We're not going to be doing our normal segments. This is going to be kind of an experiment. I'm going to try and touch this recording as little as possible. So there might be significantly more ums and repeating the same phrase a few times. Because we're going to kind of go for a more unedited podcast. And I apologize if that's not something you like. One thing that I pride myself in Level with Us is how well edited it is, how concise and short it is. But this is going to kind of be the opposite, so brace yourself.
I think it's going to shock some people how much more I can stutter. Like, they think that they've heard what I have to offer. Oh, they don't know. They don't know what you've cleaned, what you've sanitized.
For both of us, yeah. Well, without further ado, let's dive into things. Before we get into the games that we played, I want to talk about, what did we think of Sony games before we started playing them? What is a Nintendo fan's perception of those Sony titles? Because for me, it's, Sony titles, those are really mature. They're really complex. They're kind of gritty and dark, but they have really impressive graphics. They are millions of dollars in the budget, kind of cinematic type of stuff. What about you? What do you think of when you think of PlayStation games?
I think growing up playing video games, I actually didn't have much of a compartment in my brain to kind of contrast it with the Xbox. I just sort of thought of them as the other systems. I knew that the controller looked different, but Yeah, I guess sort of similar feelings. I just honestly didn't know until fairly recently what were actually PlayStation exclusives.
Right. And I think there's less PlayStation exclusives than Nintendo ones. Like, a lot of their big games are multi-platform titles. But they do have exclusives, and we have played some of them. Not all of them, though. This list is not comprehensive. For example, there's no Uncharted and no The Last of Us on this list. Sorry. But it is a decent cherry-picked selection of some of the big titles. Also, not all of these are exclusive to the PlayStation. Some are on PC, etc., etc. So, with that, let's get started. God of War. I've already talked about this game twice, I think, on the podcast. But very, very briefly, I found the combat very engaging. I thought the combat is what made this game for me. The puzzles were good. It was well acted. The story was interesting. And it kind of convinced me that Western-produced games can be good. And I know I have played Western games, but most of the stuff I play is Nintendo. It's very well polished. But there's something really nice about having an experience system in your game and skill trees. And yeah, the armor crafting kind of hurt my brain, but like, even though there was a lot of complexity and I had to really, really have some patience learning it, it paid off because it felt really good once I started learning it. Nintendo games, one thing I take for granted about Nintendo games is they are very easy to pick up and play and instantly know how they work. Even the more complex Nintendo games, you can get the hang of super, super fast because it's just intuitive. And with some of the games on this list, it took me a while, like at least an hour or two of playing to understand certain things. So, God of War, I really liked it.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with the kind of story of the most recent God of War game. What is actually the gameplay? Is it a lot of one-on-one fighting? Is there a critical path, or is it a little more open?
Yeah, it kind of both for all those questions. Like, it is an open world, but like you progress through it linearly. There's just kind of like a central hub where you're rowing in a boat and can go and you can explore. You can go off the beaten path, and exploring is really fun because you always stumble into treasure. But yeah, as you progress the game, each level is pretty linear. It doesn't feel linear, but it is. And then combat-wise, no, you fight waves of enemies, but it is, the camera is right over your shoulder, so you are up close and personal with the action. And there's a lot of like combos and stuff, but it's very weighty. It feels really good to just hack through things. So I'd love for you to try it out someday. Maybe when the sequel comes out and I'm eventually able to actually buy a PS5. Spoilers for the end of this podcast. These games have convinced me that it is worth owning a Sony system. But another one that we've kind of already talked about on this podcast is It Takes Two. So a few episodes ago, my wife Mariah and I talked about this game, and there's nothing else to add to it other than I liked it. It's great. It's great to have a friend to play it with. I recommend it, and I want to play it with you, Marcus. It's a very Nintendo-like game in a lot of ways. It's just kind of goofy and fun and full of ideas, new ideas every level, and that feels very, Mario-like in some ways.
It's interesting, games that require things like, unfortunately, It Takes Two, friend is not included, So you just have to acquire one of those because you can't play it alone, as I've been told. So
right, but it is generous. The game lets you play with someone who doesn't own a copy of the game, no matter what system you're on. You can download a free basically game file that will let you connect with someone who does own a full copy.
That's very cool.
So
That's
it's
the way
accessible,
I think
even though
be,
especially because you cannot play it single player. It's just not allowed. So we can do it someday. Maybe on Steam, or maybe if I get that PS5. Okay, Shadow of the Colossus.
You played this game?
I did this week.
I want to play this game.
I'm about to return the PS4. You gotta drive up here and play it, Marcus.
No.
This game is really good. It's drop dead gorgeous. Like, it looks like a next gen game, even though it's on the PS4. And God of War as well. Like, God of War looks amazing too. Most of these games do. But Shadow of the Colossus, like the art, is really something special. I knew that I'd like this game. I already knew it was good. I've seen the PS2. I think I played like a few minutes of the PS2 version once. But it's so great, and it's an art game, so there's not like a ton of mechanics or anything. The game is stripped down to its bare elements. There is only fighting the colossi and riding your horse to each colossi. There are no side quests, there are no collectibles, there is nothing other than the wide open landscape, very minimal UI, and big cinematic moments where you're fighting these colossi. And some of them are like puzzles, you have to think as you play. But that being said, this game, I mean, later on I'll talk about Journey, and I love Journey too, but I'm not big on art games usually. Like, I don't think art games are super satisfying because, you know, they're short and they're pretty, but there's not a lot of thinking involved sometimes for certain ones like Abzu and Grease and Journey, like I said. But this one, like, kind of convinced me, like, you know what, this artsy games can be good if they have like a good theme to them. You know, this game has combat, even though it's not super in depth. But you know, presentation wise and atmosphere wise, it was, fantastic. Can't recommend it enough.
In my head, I've been imagining it as Legend of Zelda stripped down to being just 14 boss fights. Is that fair or not so much? Yeah,
I think you could sum it up that way. And obviously, you know, there's more to it. There's a thing, but you're right. No, simply like gameplay wise, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Ratchet and Clank. So I picked this one up at Walmart for dirt cheap. And all I really knew about it, I didn't know anything about the series. I didn't know that this game was essentially a remake, and it kind of changes a lot of things about the originals that people love. But that being said, I still liked it. It wasn't my favorite game, but I liked the weapons. They were, you know, they have big, crunchy effects when you take out enemies with them. And it is cool to see something that looks like a Nintendo game, if that makes sense, where it's, you know, colorful protagonists, you know, colorful characters, and a bright, colorful world. It's a platformer, technically. So, and as far as I understand, there's not a lot of those outside of Nintendo, I think. So, I did like that was here, and I thought the animation, especially, was really good, too. But, like I said, I wasn't super hooked by it, and we'll get into the sequel later, but I enjoyed the sequel quite a bit more.
Oh, this isn't a Rift in Time.
No, this is like, it's just called Ratchet and Clank on the PS4.
Gotcha.
Rift Apart, yeah, that's on PS5, and we have not reached our PS5 part of the discussion yet.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sorry, there is, even though there's not segments, there is an order to this. And the next one on this list is going to be one where I turn the time over to you so you can talk to us about Ghost of Tsushima.
Awesome. Okay.
So you rented this game, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. I rented this game. I also borrowed a PS4 for a hot minute. And I wanted to try Ghost of Tsushima because open world games, you know, I kind of wanted to experience what were the other kind of AAA open world experiences like. I'd heard really good things about the graphics and a few other aspects of it. So I gave it a try and overall really enjoyed it. I'm not sure what there is really to say specifically about it. Its kind of central conceit is, you know, the reason it's called the Ghost of Tsushima is because you can be stealthy. But it's kind of interesting because it puts this moral framework on it where people are like, to be a samurai, you must look them in the eyes as you slaughter them. That is the only just way to kill. And this is very far distanced from my own experience of morality, but they make kind of a big deal of it. So you can be sneaky, or you can like just challenge a person to a one-on-one duel. Be like, you there, I'm going to kill you. And then it'll like basically enter this cutscene mode where you can kill them in one strike. I think that's a cool idea. I think that some aspects of it could have potentially gotten a little repetitive. I didn't finish the game, but I realized that, you know, each kind of shrine that you go to is a similar sort of scripted climbing sequence to get your way up a mountain, and pretty much every camp is going to be about the same in terms of like how you can interact with it, how you can solve the problems. So I feel like the main draw of the game is just its combat, probably, is the expanding. You learn different stances, and different stances work well against different people. I mean, different types of weapons, different types of fighters, and you get other special abilities or moves, and that felt really cool.
Yeah, and I watched you play it a little bit. I am a big fan of Akira Kurosawa films. I haven't seen too many, but the ones I have seen I really, really liked. And I like that this game was trying very hard to capture the feeling and the spirit of those movies. You touched on how a lot of the camps seemed similar. Like, I've heard it said that like open world games suffer from basically creating a huge world and then just kind of copying and pasting content throughout the world to make it feel more populated and dense. Like, is that kind of what your experience was with it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that some games, some open world games, when they're sort of married to a certain theme or location, they've sort of tied their own hands. It's not like they could be like, oh, on this Japanese island, there's the lava over there, and there's the ice world over there. You know, they can't really have that extreme biodiversity. No,
sure.
Biome diversity. There we go.
Okay.
So in that sense, there are large swaths of land that look fairly similar, except, over here there are red trees instead. So it can kind of make a lot of it feel, like you said, a little copy and pasted. I think that's a little unfair to generalize over all games, and even Ghosts of Tsushima, I'm sure that there was more there that, you know, because I didn't experience all of it, but for certain aspects of it, there was a little bit of, I go over here, and now I'm going to do kind of the same thing I was doing over there.
Right. Well, and going back to kind of our central discussion throughout this podcast, which is how do these games compare to Nintendo games, I do want to talk about what open world games like this have in common and don't have in common with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. But we can kind of start that discussion with this next game on the list, which is Horizon Zero Dawn. This game came out at the same time as Breath of the Wild, which is unfortunate, and the sequel just came out around the same time as Elden Ring, which is also very unfortunate. I feel kind of bad for them, but it is a good game. And for some reason, maybe because of that, you know, link in my brain that said, oh, this was the same week as Breath of the Wild, I kind of expected it to be similar to Breath of the Wild. And I think some people do too when they see that the protagonist also has a bow and arrow, you know, and a big scale and scope. But really, this game is completely different. It's kind of it's weird because like I only watched you play Ghost of Tsushima, and I've never played an open world game before besides Breath of the Wild, and yet as I played it, I could like kind of tell there were a lot of games like it, if that makes sense. Like, sure. I could tell it shared some elements from Ghost of Tsushima that you were playing. I could tell it shared elements from some Ubisoft games that I've glanced at. So I started to understand, this is why, you know, this is what a lot of open world games are like. They throw a lot of icons at you, they throw a lot of quests at you. It's a big open world you can freely explore, but there is a lot of the kind of very similar, very, much the same content across it. But that being said, like, I think where this game hits its stride is with the giant robotic monsters. There's like, kind of dinosaurs and animals, but they're robots. This is post-apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic, as some of the developers call it, which you'd have to read the story to kind of understand it. Which, by the way, tangent, I didn't expect much from this story. One of my coworkers said it was really good, and I had been a few hours in at that point. I was like, it's not really. Like, it's okay, I guess. But then once you start hitting like the sci-fi stuff, like why the world is the way that it is, why there's robotic monsters, and why the people are in a tribal state, it gets really good. Like I was actually like, this is cool. And there's lots of lore. There's lots of like talking to NPCs and explaining their religion and their ties with another tribe you've visited and kind of the tensions there. And like, you have to dig for it. You have to talk to a lot of people and read and listen to audio logs and stuff. But there's actually a really interesting story underneath, all those game mechanics that are seen a lot. And so anyway, going back to the monsters, I think it's cool that this game has an identity that does set it apart, in that fighting all the monsters usually takes different tactics. It feels really good to be able to unlock the ability to hack one of them and then watch it attack the others. You can of course go about things through stealth. There's lots of weapons. It really emphasizes ranged combat, which is unfortunate because I did rely on melee combat a lot, but I hear the sequel fixes that. Anyway, I liked this game. So comparing this to Breath of the Wild, I'm understanding why people were so crazy about it. Besides the fact that I just loved it because it was different than any other Zelda game, I'm understanding why people liked the fact that it was an open world game that changed what open world games could be, in that you could interact with the world way more in Breath of the Wild than most of these games. Most of these games, like Horizon's beautiful, it's very detailed, but you can't chop down a tree, right? Mm-hmm. Like you can, maybe there's some like bushes or something that are affected by combat and stuff. But your fire arrows don't set anything on fire except monsters, right?
Yeah, the interactivity of the world, and also I think its approach to story. Like, because of the Breath of the Wild, I feel like whenever I hear another game is open world, I feel like there's this promise of, oh, I should be able to go to the final boss right now, And that is not the way most open world games work, Like this entire idea of you choose what the story is, in a sense. Like, are you the hero that scours every inch of the land preparing for the final battle? Are you driven by the story? Are you just driven by the foes? These other games, to some extent, no matter how open they are, they have these kind of firmer gates, I feel like, than Breath of the Wild does.
Sure, and on that point, not just story-wise, also just not throwing icons at you, just being like, use the landscape to decide where you explore and then take your journey from there. And in Breath of the Wild, there are some main objectives, but in general, you do them in any order and you go to whatever area you want in any order, and you're still technically progressing the game and progressing the story. Whereas this game, you're right, you're absolutely right. It was a linear story. It was just, I could explore all I wanted, but it was just waiting for me to go to the waypoint, because that was the only way to get the story moving. Anything I do is separate from it. So if there is a quest line that's like urgent and immediate, and I'm just doing other things, it kind of breaks the immersion a tiny bit, because it's right. So I guess in a way, like, it's almost as if the open world is a set piece for the story to take place on. Whereas in Breath of the Wild, I felt like the open world was the story. Does that make sense? Like, the story doesn't just happen in it. The game's designed around that, whereas this game, the game was designed and then put in an open world, I guess. Yeah,
that's similar to Tsushima, I think. Mm-hmm. They're like, in the first kind of large area of the game, you have these kind of three main quests. You gotta help this character avenge their family, this character teach you how to use a bow and arrow, and this character how to recruit Ronins. And you have to do all three of those things before you can have an encounter that opens up the next segment of the island. And now it's like, oh, that Ronin guy is now against you and evil, and now you're fighting some... Like, it very much... Certain things had to happen before other things happened. So, yeah, just basically what you said.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't really have any other things. I've already talked about it a lot. If I had one more note, it's just that the crafting is really fun. So it does get that right. Like, I liked collecting things constantly and making ammo out of it. And the XP and skill trees, like, there is a progression from that feels good. To the point where I found I had skipped some tutorials early in the game, and I went back because they give you experience for doing them. And I just wanted to level up because I unlocked new abilities by doing that. And that feels really good. So, all right. Well, we've completed our PS4 library of discussions. So it's time to move on and get upgraded to the PS5. So the PS5 comes with a game called Astro's Playroom, which is just delightful. And I know you did play this one because I invited you over to try it out. Any thoughts on it, Marcus?
It very much feels kind of in the tradition of Wii Sports or other comes with the console games. It is more than a tech demo, but very much to feature certain aspects of the game. You know, like we've got the haptic triggers, we've got the motion control of the controller, and I think that's actually a very ingenious way to showcase what the console can do by having this game take place in the console. I think that's a very fun thing.
Such a cool idea. I love it. And I agree with you. This is like kind of, in my opinion, the most Nintendo-like game Sony's ever made. Because it's a 3D platformer. It's kind of like a Mario game. But yeah, it's very gimmicky. There's, the touchpad controls one level. The adaptive triggers are used very frequently. The load times, they make a point of showing you how fast the load times are. Just delightful. The robots are super cute. Love this game. If you get a PS5, don't skip it. Because you don't have an excuse. It's free. Oh, and then lots of Sony references throughout, which is cool. Even though I didn't grow up with Sony, I loved that they were putting in this weird internet adapter that plugged into the PS2 and just random parts of Sony history. Just cool. Just cool.
I've heard it said that Sony has typically not been as, I don't know if self-indulgent is the word, but self-indulgent as Nintendo is. Like, Nintendo very much is like, it's the 25th anniversary of Zelda. Let's take a trip on memory lane and talk about all the Zelda. Or, it very frequently it'll like talk about and romanticize the previous generations of video games. And obviously I don't have much experience, but I hear that Sony does that less, so it's kind of cool to see them get the chance to kind of pat themselves on the back, I guess, and be like, check out all these franchises.
Yeah, you're right. And the more I think about it, like, Sony did the PlayStation Battle All-Stars thing, but apart from that, they don't really show off their big IPs, right? They have a couple running series, but like Nintendo, you always wait on the next fill-in-the-blank Nintendo game, right? They make new IPs sometimes, but they're always bringing back, hey, remember your nostalgia from this game? Here's a new one. They rely on their characters. That's their business model. I agree. I think Sony is less of that. So it is cool to see them kind of homage their characters. Well, this next game is completely different from Astro's Playroom. This next one is Returnal. This game's made by Housemarque, which made kind of arcadey games before, and it's really cool to see them do kind of take that arcadey-ness and put it into a AAA big-budget roguelike game. In fact, this is the most big-budget roguelike I've ever played. Also gets the juiciest game award from me. There's just particle effects everywhere, out the wazoo. You're trapped in a time loop. You fight aliens, and if you die, you reset the loop. So you're just trying to progress through each alien area with your weapons. Cool game. It looks cool. It's also really hard. I kind of wish there was an easy mode. I'm more and more okay playing games on easy, especially when I know I'm not going to have forever to complete them. I had a time limit to get through all these games before returning the system, so I only made it to the third area. But I did like what I played, and atmospheric-wise, it's very spooky and good.
Jared, when you say you give it the Juicy Award, can you please edit in a sound that goes sploosh?
I'll do it. I wasn't going to edit much, but I will do that for you.
Just a single. If you want to, you can just take this. I'll do one more clean. Sploosh.
I think I'd rather use a stock sound effect.
Wait, one more.
Thank you. Oh.
I'm just joking. Go ahead.
Okay. Cool. You got to play Returnal briefly. Did you have any vague impressions? If you don't want to share, that's fine. I'm just
My
curious.
only thought was the juice sound effect.
You're like, I'm sorry, that's all I can think about right now.
I think, considering that I've been playing a little bit of Risk of Rain 2 recently, and really enjoyed my time with Hades and a few other roguelike or rogue-inspired games, I bet I would really get into this. Games that have a satisfying loop like this, at least from what I've heard of it, I bet I could get really hooked on this game. And it does look very visually stunning.
Okay. And next is Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. I liked Rift Apart a lot. It uses the adaptive triggers, so every weapon feels even more crunchy and juicy. There's that juice sound effect again.
How can something be both crunchy and juicy?
You crunch into it and juice spurts out.
Ew. I'm trying to think of a food where that's a pleasant description.
The gameplay is juicy. Whatever. Okay.
It's good. You like it. Uh-huh.
I liked it. It's good. It looks really good. The world is cartoony, but very detailed. I actually enjoyed the story way more than the first one. It's nothing special, but it was, it was cool. I liked that it was a short game. I really appreciated that because I was on a time limit, but also like my preferences have changed a lot over the years, and I don't really like long games. I like short ones. In fact, Horizon, I played through, and I did enjoy it, but once I beat it, I had no desire to do the DLC or the extra side quests. I thought I would. I'm usually a completionist for certain games, but anyway, I liked how short this one was. The weapons were really cool. The only problem I'd say I had with it is that the weapons are fun, but they don't really require you to use certain ones. You basically use one until it runs out of ammo, and then you switch to another one. There's no situation where, oh, this enemy, I better use this weapon. Like, there are some with bigger spreads and some with smaller spreads, but there just wasn't, like, the enemy variety was fine, but there was no particular weapon that worked for each one. I think the game wanted you to just experiment and then choose the weapons you liked the best, that felt the best, and then use those. And I don't know, I think I would have preferred it if there was a little more strategy involved, if that makes sense. But yeah.
Yeah, this game, I already used the term visually stunning at least once already, but it does look really impressive. And from the perspective of a Nintendo fan who hasn't really ever had much of a graphics, like just graphics, this whole war of like higher fidelity, I never really thought of the Wii as having poor graphics or anything like that because I was just all about the games and I didn't ever play other systems, or at least not much. So it's interesting, kind of this new era of the most recent advances in visual, processing, whatever you call it. This is one of those games I think is a really good argument for it really can enhance the experience to have this ramped up quality of visuals and loading times, etc.
I think you're right, because art direction is great, and with good art you can make poor graphics, still work really well, and Nintendo rides on that a lot. But you're right. After I've played a few of the games on this list, I'm like, okay, I get why people want a Switch Pro. Like, I get why people want something powerful, because I wasn't even playing on a 4K display, and I was just like, this is so detailed and smooth 60 FPS. It felt really good, and the art really got to, they really got to show off their art direction by, having all that visual processing, or whatever those technical words are that you were searching for.
I can really tell that we're not video game journalists whenever I try to talk about specifics. I'm like, yeah, and the gameplay.
The PS5 is 4 teraflops of giga memory.
Giga discs of rags.
I've been listening to like reviews of the Steam Deck, and they're all very positive, but like they're all by the hardcore techie, nerds that love just dissecting each little stat of the hardware. I'm like, I don't know what that means. I hope it's good.
And with 364 gigs of non-solid disk drive gigarams.
Right. Graphics good, and that can be a great selling point, and it helps that most of these games. By the way, I wasn't outright disappointed by any game on this list. I was actually, I think that's because I knew what I would enjoy, and those are the ones I chose to play. So we're getting towards the end here. Kena Bridge of Spirits. This game's way more simple than I thought. The combat is way more simple, and again, I just played a bunch of more complex combat systems in some of these earlier games like Horizon and God of War. But that being said, there is a beauty to the simplicity of this game. It really made me feel like I was playing a classic 3D Zelda game. There wasn't any dungeons per se. The game is more open than traditional Zelda games, but it just looks amazing. You can tell it's made by an animation team who puts the art and animation, above everything else. I could only dream of a Zelda game looking this good. And animation, especially in the cutscenes, also just fantastic. You could just string those together and make a film. Music's cool. Has some gamelan music. If you've ever watched Raya and the Last Dragon, it's kind of like that. Kind of a Southeast Asia, Indonesian style of music, and it's very, very pretty in this game. I would have loved it if there was a little more to the combat or the skill tree, but it didn't need it for it to be good. It would have been nice also if there was collectibles. I know it just sounds like I'm throwing a bunch of quick jabs, but these are the notes I wrote down as I was playing. The only collectibles are you can buy cute little hats for your cute little forest spirits called the Rot that follow you around, and I shouldn't complain about that. It's amazing. It would just be nice if there was stuff that actually progressed my abilities. I think also Metroidvanias have spoiled me a bit, where I'm like, oh, sweet, a new ability, I can do so much more cool stuff. I like that progression, but again, loved this game, loved the short length again. Really pretty, really fun. I just assume you'll jump in if you have thoughts, but we can move on. Marcus is nodding, so that means we're going on to Miles Morales, Spider-Man. The reason I played this game is because it was on the PS5 I was borrowing. I do own Spider-Man for the PS4, but I knew Miles Morales was a shorter game, it had a shorter campaign, and I knew the core gameplay was very, very, very similar, so I just played this one. And it's the newer one, so, what everyone said about the web swinging is right. It feels really good. It takes more warming up than I thought, but once you get the hang of it, it feels nice. You have some agency as to how you navigate the city. Like, you're just, it becomes seamless over time as you jump on certain things, know when to let go of your swing, and pretty soon you're going super fast, and it feels great. Story was also decently engaging. If I could throw in a quick jab, though, in the final fight, you have this, finisher icon that throughout the game you hit, square and triangle together, and it pulls off a cool cinematic finisher. In the final boss fight, in fact, some of the boss fights, it'll show that icon, and you press it, and then it just goes into a cutscene where Miles just gets beat up, a bunch. So I was like, oh, what? I whittled down their health to 0, and now I'm like, finish them. And I press it, and Miles just gets tackled by them and gets punched in the face 10 times. I'm like, this doesn't feel good. I don't like that. That's not a trope I like in movies either, where the hero only wins at the last possible second. I like seeing their skill and wits come through, So, again, that was a quick jab, though. It's not a huge deal. The combat was fun. It's kind of floaty and combo-y and not my favorite, but it was still cool. Yeah.
I feel like that's a quick jab of all video games. This sort of
it's a trope I don't like.
It happens in RPGs, like turn-based RPGs, pretty frequently too, where you'll beat someone up and then they'll be like, ho-ho, and then they'll just heal up and then you'll be, knocked down to 0 health because it's a part of the plot.
I feel like we talked about this in a different episode, actually. Wasn't there a game where I was like, I'd rather the game would have me just not be able to hit this person other than beating them, but then not actually
I feel like
beating
Twooey.
them.
I think it was Neo.
That was it.
World Ends With You.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you'll my least favorite theme was finishing a boss fight, and then the first dialogue that comes after is huff huff. There are too many of them. I'm like, oh no, that
what?
means it's gonna say that we lost.
Them. Come on, yeah. Yeah. So not all games are exempt from that. Western produced games can have that trope as well, I guess. I guess one last thing about Miles Morales. I like Miles Morales. I like Spider-Man, so I did like this game. Going back to the open world thing, it's cool to have a city be an open world where you can literally climb the buildings and run on them and swing between them. That's a cool concept for an open world game. That being said, again, there's just not a lot of ways to interact with the world, and I found that disappointing. In fact, the most interacting with the world I was able to do was figuring out that you can insta-kill guys, or instant defeat, because Spider-Man doesn't kill people, them by swing kicking them off a building. And if you watch them fall, like eventually it'll be like, oh, it turns out you attached a web trap to them, and they like suddenly adhesive, they suddenly like snap to the wall, so they didn't actually die. But I was like, okay, this is cool. I can actually use the environment to do something, and I just try and kick every enemy off the building. And then I'm like, sweet, fight over. I didn't have to mash square 20 times to beat this enemy. So I liked that a lot. So there you go. That'll balance out the quick jab a little bit. We've reached the round where we're going to rapid fire talk about a bunch of games that I didn't really play through all the way, or I just, briefly touched, but I still have a couple little thoughts on them. So here we go. Nier Automata. This game, I've heard a lot about the story, and whenever I've looked at it, I'm like, that is an RPG, and it looks really vague. Like, it looks like the storytelling is probably, like, poetic and hard to understand, and I wasn't interested in that. But no, actually, this game has lots of world building. It has lots of NPCs. I thought you were just, like, alone in the world. I was completely wrong. The opening sequence of the game, which is basically all I played, is really good. They just bang, 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 throw tons of new gameplay styles at you. They keep you hooked and engaged. And then eventually they kind of set you loose on the open world, and you can talk to people. And again, it's an RPG. The combat didn't, I didn't love it. But I see why people like it. And the music is as amazing as people say. I keep saying as people say because this is all I've gotten from Sony games before. I just hear things. People tell me these games are good. Now I'm finally understanding, and it feels great. The music is incredible. So cool. Okay, Journey. Again, it's an artsy game. Shadow of the Colossus did more for me than this one did, but still really cool. I remember when this game first came out and how much I wanted to play it. It was great. I wish I could have had other people to play it with. Only like one person showed up anonymously. This game, they're supposed to be able to kind of see other players as you all make the same journey. I only saw one person, and they were like stuck in a wall. They were like clipped into a wall. I was like, well, this is fun. I'm so glad I got to interact with other people on my journey.
I have an anecdote. I played this game through when I was borrowing the PS4.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was with one person who clearly knew more what they were doing, like paired anonymously with someone online. And I went through like three or four segments of it with them. I get to like the snowy mountain, which is like the penultimate spot.
Right.
And without really realizing what I was doing, after we went through all these challenges, I yeeted myself off a cliff and found myself exactly at the start of that level.
Oh no.
And then I was like, well, goodbye forever, friend, I guess, because they were gone. Anyway.
Makes you wish you could have seen their reaction in real life when that happened.
Yeah, walk, yeet, and then back to the beginning. I don't even know exactly how that happened. I don't know why I thought maybe there was some jump. I was like, oh, I need to jump from this side of the canyon to that side. And then I just fell in the canyon, and I realized it was not the right spot.
Oh, that's terrible. I'm sorry.
It was very pretty, though. Nice game.
Fair enough. And also for these rapid fire games, I wish I could have given them more time. I really do. It's unfortunate that my perception of these games are skewed by having that time limit, where I was literally just kind of I was waiting. Journey is a short game, and I still was like ready for it to be over soon. It kind of became a chore, which is not how you should experience that game. You should just go in so that you can enjoy it. But yeah, that's a good one. Demon Souls. This is another one where I'm like, yes, this looks like a next generation game. Like, impressive visually, which is a running theme for most of these games. I didn't love how difficult it is, but that's just a Souls thing that, just doesn't appeal to me. But I hear Elden Ring is really good, because if you find a point that's too hard, you can just run off and do something else, which really appeals to me. So I do want to play Elden Ring and talk about it on the show at some point. But Demon Souls does look cool. It does play pretty cool. It's just hard, and yeah, I only played a little bit of it, so sadly don't have much else to say about it. Cool. Marcus, any other Sony games that you've had the chance to play that you want to get off your chest?
No, No, I'm just enjoying hearing you do all the rapid fire here. I'm kind of keeping a mental checklist of the games that I would like to play next time I have the opportunity.
Yeah, which ones?
Well, now that you've asked me, it's all... No, Horizon Zero Dawn, a lot of these games, the ones that you're talking about, I'm interested in trying them out, and also their sequels. So, like, the new Horizon.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to learn more about Elden Ring. I haven't been following it as closely as the rest of the video gaming world is, I'm sure. But what I have heard, it's, sounded very cool, very interesting. I would like to have a little taste of Nier Automata, just because, like you were saying, it's vague in my mind, and I feel like it might click with me. It's hard to say. So,
sure.
Yeah, I just feel like, if this podcast kind of represents you taste testing a whole bunch, I feel like at some point I got to get myself a charcuterie board of PS games as well, and give more of them a go. Because there's so many great games out there, both AAA and indie games, and it's just cool to, kind of expand into these other platforms and see what is more general to video games than just on a single system.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you're right in your assumption that you would really dig the story for a lot of the games on this list. As a storyteller and as a writer, that I know you are, you really like cool high concept science fiction, which you really get in some of these games, and you love mythology, which you'll get in God of War, and and I guess that's another thing. I didn't think about it when we started talking about it, but Nintendo really doesn't put in-depth stories. Like, generally their stories are always kept simple, and there are exceptions, of course, but they don't emphasize the lore and the world building and the crazy amounts of text in their games. And I think that's still a good way to go about it. They put gameplay first. It makes their games accessible. It makes them fun. Even though people complain about wanting more story in Zelda, I think some Zelda games would be worse if they put way more, tons and tons of story in it. So I definitely see that viewpoint. On the other hand, I really did like that I was getting something that I hadn't gotten before, which was really cool, well written, well thought out narratives. So, well, you mentioned there's a lot of games out there, and I wanted to ask the listeners, what did we miss? What am I really missing out on when it comes to PlayStation exclusives? Because this experience was enough for me to decide, yes, I will buy a PS5. I will do it someday. Once it's in stock, once the timing is right, I will do it, and I will play through a bunch of the new games that have been coming out for it, because they are worth experiencing. Even though Nintendo was my first love and will continue to be, I want to be a part of this PlayStation world now. And you can tell us what games we missed in the comments of the YouTube version of this show, or you can send us an email at levelwithUspodcast@gmail.com, or tweet at us at LVLWithUs. And I genuinely do like hearing what people think. I like it when people tell me, hey, I don't like this particular thing about your podcast. It actually means a lot to me. It means I can, keep that in mind going forward. And obviously I like hearing positive feedback too, so don't be a stranger. Next week we will be back to our normal format. We've got a fun little indie game that we'll be chatting about. And until then, I'm Jared.
I'm Marcus.
And we'll level with you next week.
That effort sounds like you hear an anime. You actually don't know if you hear this sound. You actually don't know if it's good or bad. Little known fact. Sometimes that's a good sound. Like imagine in your mind, guy meets girl and drops his books. Then that's just embarrassment. But how about he meets the person who killed his father? Then it's like rage.